Good evening and welcome to Realty Coffee Talk on Awaz Entertainment. My name is Tahir Qureshi. I'm your host tonight. We'll be discussing today advertising consent for sold property. We have received quite a bit of complaints about consumer where the property was advertised without the consent of the buyer or the seller. There are very clear direction from Real Estate Council of Ontario, which is the regulator in the province of Ontario who regulate buying and selling real estate in the province of Ontario. What is the informed consent when the property is sold? Who are involved with this transaction? When a property is listed for sale, you have a seller and you have a listing brokerage represented by a salesperson, broker, or brokerage. You have a second party which is a buyer, and you also have a broker. It could be buyer salesperson or buyer broker who is representing the side. So when a transaction is completed in partnership with the buyer broker and seller broker, a property is sold, there are very specific instructions at what stage this consent should be granted. Let's go back. You are trying to buy a property, you are putting an offer, and the listing broker include a clause which give you the permission to advertise the property after it has been sold. That clause is not the right way of doing and obtaining a consent from the buyer. What will happen if the buyer does not give you that consent to advertise, and then you refuse that to entertain that offer, or you force them to accept that condition in the Schedule B? According to the Real Estate Business Broker Sold Property Guidelines, they recommend that consent should be obtained for advertising a sold property after the transaction has been negotiated. That means it has not influenced the decision of the buyer to give you the consent to advertise, after the property has been sold. Sometime I have personally experienced where my client was ready to walk away from the deal because he does not want to give consent, but it was included in a Schedule B. So this is also a request to all my fellow real estate professionals. Try to negotiate the deal. You are selling a property and your cooperating broker is buying a property. Therefore, the focus will be the property, conditions that make the deal happen collectively between cooperating with each other. So when that transaction has been completed, or deal has been signed, then you can seek, because you still have a conditional period depending on the residential sale. As a minimum, as a benchmark, we use at least 5 days for home inspection and mortgage financing and appraisal. So conditions are still there. The deal is not firm. It has not been bought. So there is no purpose of putting that clause in Schedule B to include the consent now. And this agreement is between buyer and seller. It is not between the brokerage, listing brokerage and cooperating brokerage. Anytime you advertise, this is once the deal has been completed, then you will be able to seek consent and cooperation from the seller and the buyer to advertise. So this is very, very critical. It's very, very important. We want to make sure the consumer feel comfortable that they are able, if let's assume the buyer does not want to give you permission to advertise. I have recently cases we negotiated a deal in Niagara region, and we're going through the inspection and mortgage financing. We remove all those conditions because they're not part of getting you permission to advertise. You need to focus on selling the property first before you focus on getting a consent to advertise. So we just did that one deal, and we were able to delete those, and we told them once that transaction is completed and the buyer will consider this, your request, you send us a separate informed consent or express consent form, and then we will be able to present to the buyer, and I don't see any problem helping the fellow cooperators. Also, I always said, if you're doing a consent, you also give consent to the cooperating broker as well as to the selling brokerage, because we are working together, so it's very important. Now, if consumer think that you have forced him to sign this particular advertising consent because they want this property, they can complain against you in Real Estate Council of Ontario, because they're not happy to give that, but they want that property. It happens to me one time in Milton. I deleted twice, but the listing broker added 3 times. And my client wanted to buy this property anyway. So he signed it, and he mentioned to me that he was going to complain because he was not happy. And this is what we have to understand, because of privacy. It's a buyer rights to grant you the consent. You cannot unilaterally go out and advertise without the consent of the buyer. There are special advertising guidelines from Real Estate Council of Ontario, and you are able to see them in there. So now I tell you, if let's assume that you bought a property and everything, deal has been firm now, ready to close, you're making arrangement, mortgage is done, inspection is done, verification of septic tank is done, verification of water well, everything is done, you're satisfied and is closing. You are firm, everything is done. So it's going to close in a week, 2 weeks. The selling agent can advertise, but there are special guidelines from Real Estate Council of Ontario about informed consent. So be aware that there could be a complaint against you if you force the buyer to give you consent. Now, there are guidelines if a seller wants to advertise a sold property without the image and without the property, the seller consent is required. If you are a listing broker and you want to advertise, according to Real Estate Council guidelines, the seller brokerage wants to advertise that property is sold with or without the image of a property, you still need the seller consent after it has been sold. I see so many people advertising the property without getting consent. I hope they do. I'm encouraging them to do. That means once the property is sold firm and is closing, this property has a privacy connected with the buyer. Let's assume the seller broker wants to advertise the property with the image or without the image, and want to mention, link to information in the agreement of purchase and sale. The buyer and seller written consent is required. So if you are a consumer, you're watching, you have the right to give that consent to the buyer, a seller representative, to advertise the property or not. If you are a listing broker, you have to make sure that consent is obtained, that link the image of the property or any percentage of the property amount is sold. During our experience, we learned that many times consumer buyer, they don't want to show how much it was paid. They don't want to show their property on the social media or advertise. I have noticed many times in my neighborhood where I live, I get flyers, 4 years, 5 years old flyers with the pictures on it. So is this consent that was given by the buyer at that time? Maybe the ownership has already changed and you're still using that consent. So once the property resold again 2 years, 3 years down the line, that consent is gone. People are still showing that consent on the advertisement, on their brochures. If you get it through Canada Post, because right now coronavirus, many of those are being done through social media, or they just sold property. You can see them most frequently sold property. Make sure you have informed consent, and also to make sure this is done after you have purchased the property and you got the consent separately. There is a leeway. Again, if you put in the Schedule B, you maybe get away with it, but you are creating a position where the buyer is forced to give this consent to you when he or she is negotiating the price and terms and conditions of the agreement. And this has to be avoided. So buyer can buy it with the conditions they put in the agreement of purchase and sale, and then they'd say, okay, everything is very cooperative, everything is sold firm now. If the seller agent wants to advertise, tell him to send me in. There is a form I created myself. It's available, samples are available. And then you present to the buyer. If they give you express consent to advertise, you take their picture. But if you do not get that consent, do not advertise. If a consumer complains to Real Estate Council of Ontario, you will be violating the advertising compliance guidelines. So it's very important to understand, and this is very common mistakes. No bad intentions, but the idea is to secure advertisement so we can get more business. Let's assume the buyer brokerage want to advertise with or without photo. In that case, sellers, let's assume that you are a listing broker, I'm a cooperating broker, I want to advertise the property because I brought the buyer and I am the selling broker. So I need advertisement for this area. So in order for me, my brokerage to advertise, I will must seller's consent and the brokerage consent. Let's assume that I want to advertise. I need to advertise. Okay, we're going to take a short break and we'll get back to you. You're on Awaz TV and Realty Coffee Talk. Get back to you.
कनाडा की आवाज, पाकिस्तान की आवाज।
देखें और रहें बाखबर।
सियासत हो या खेल का मैदान, मईशियत हो या इंसाफ का फौकदान,
दुनिया जहां की खबरें और तबसरे
देखिए आपके अपने चैनल आवाज न्यूज पर,
सिर्फ आपके अपने चैनल आवाज न्यूज पे।
शहबाज गोरी, सुबह 5 बजे देखिए सितारे और हम, 5:30 बजे देखिए मैसेज ऑफ मर्सी। शाम 6 बजे देखिए दीन और दुनिया। इस्लाम इन मॉडर्न टाइम मजहर अयूब के साथ देखिए हर मंगल शाम 6 बजे और हर जुमा शाम 5 बजे। हालात
Yeah,
हाजरा
7:45.
सलमान अरशद के साथ देखिए हर पीर को शाम 7 बजे और जुमेरात 8 बजे। थिंक अबाउट इट सलमान कुरैशी के साथ हर मंगल शाम 7 बजे। रियल्टी कॉफी टॉक ताहिर कुरैशी के साथ देखिए हर जुमेरात 7 बजे। टुनाइट टॉक रिजवान असलम के साथ हर जुमे को 7 बजे। कससुल अंबिया सलमान अरशद के साथ हर इतवार 7 बजे। देखिए तकरार समीना जबीन के साथ रोज रात 9 बजे। आप देख रहे हैं आवाज एंटरटेनमेंट, आवाज आपकी, चैनल हमारा, जुड़िए हमसे।
Welcome back to Realty Coffee Talk on Awaz Entertainment in Canada and around the world. My name is Tahir Qureshi. I'm your host. We're talking about advertising consent for sold properties. We were before the break, we were talking about the buyer broker advertisement. Let's assume I am the buyer broker. I'm advertising a property that I help sell the property. So in order for me to advertise, I need to have a seller consent. Not only seller consent, but also seller broker consent to advertise the property. Because it was listed by seller and I help to sell it. Without that consent, you cannot advertise. If you are a buyer broker or a buyer representative, please make sure do not advertise selling a property that you help sold, because you need to have a written consent from the seller and seller brokerage. It's very, very important. With and without the image. It's very, very important. You can see on social media very frequently people saying, I help sell this property, blah, blah, blah. Make sure your trade record sheet file have a consent. It is part of the record with the brokerage to make sure the transaction has been completed, consent has been obtained, it is in there. This is during the property is being closed or after closing. Always use your reasonable judgment. You don't need to advertise too long. If you have already sold the property and you already have advertised it, you got the consent, and you distribute your flyer around the neighborhood where you sold the property, they already know that because you already have a sold sign on the property. There are regulations in terms of how long can you keep a sold sign on your property. Make sure you also check with the city bylaws, because there are restrictions after selling a property in Mississauga. I think after 30 days you have to remove the sign. You cannot keep it there. So there are MLS guidelines. You can also check those. You're a member of Toronto Real Estate Regional Real Estate Board or Mississauga Real Estate Board. You have to check those to make sure that you're complying with the regulation advertisement. When you are creating a flyer or a brochure or a card, make sure that you have the consent. I recommend that. Okay, we're going to pick up a call coming audience, so we're going to hold on and welcome. Hello, welcome. You're on Realty Coffee Talk on Awaz TV.
Hi there. I'm calling to see what happens if someone advertises the house that I just bought without my consent.
Well, this is a strict violation. You're welcome. Thank you for your question. It violates the Real Estate Council guideline for advertising sold property. According to if you are a buyer, you must have a buyer representative, correct?
Yes.
So the buyer broker is required to get a special. Is he the listing agent's advertising, or is your agent advertising?
No, it was the other agent. Like if I bought a house.
Okay.
And then
so
that listing agent.
Okay, selling broker is required to get, if they want to advertise with picture or without picture, and also use your percentage of the sale price, they need to have a written consent from you, buyer and seller both. They cannot advertise. It violates Real Estate Council of Ontario guidelines, advertising guidelines for sold properties. So you can go to reco.on.ca and you can check away the complaint procedure, because there's a very clear instruction from Real Estate Council of advertising guidelines.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for calling. Appreciate that.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. You see, gentlemen, my viewers, you just saw the advertisement from a gentleman. He called because he bought the property without his consent. The listing agent advertised the property. So definitely they are violating Real Estate Business Broker Act, and there is a very, very clear guidelines from Real Estate Council of Ontario about consent for sold property, particularly sold property. Because before selling the property, the seller is seller brokerage is selling the property. It's not been sold, so they have the consent in the listing agreement, because to advertise and market the property. So they have the consent. But once the property is sold firm, you lose that leverage. You only advertise with or without the image of the property. You can get seller consent again that you can advertise after the sale property. But if you are advertising with the image or without image, and also percentage of the price sold, you need a buyer and seller consent. Now, whoever sold the property, advertised the property for this gentleman who just called, then he can be subject to a complaint to Real Estate Council of Ontario. If you ever feel that someone has violated and did a advertisement without your permission, I will direct you to RECO website, is reco.on.ca, and you go there, you go complaint procedure, you click complaint, and they pay more attention to the consumer than the realtor. Reason that is because they expect us to be in compliance to REBA and now TRISA, Trust in Real Estate Act and Real Estate Business Broker Act. There are changes coming up we have spoke about in various programs. So this is important for you. You can go and call there, and you can complaint and enforcement program is everybody. You cannot advertise without the consent of the buyer and seller when you advertise property. Now let's assume the buyer broker wants to advertise property with or without, and he wants to show percentage. One is showing a picture or no picture. One is with a percentage of price. Somebody say, I sell over asking price. This is very common term. I sell over asking price. Or I price, these are the term our professional use. So then both sellers and buyer written consent is required. If the buyer will do the same advertisement that seller brokerage will do, then you need to inform. Even if you are representing a buyer, you help buy the property, you need to have a written consent from buyer and seller. You also need from the listing brokerage to advertise the property when you're showing with or without image and the percentage of the property. Idea is to privacy law, to avoid information about consumer without their consent disclosing information. We cannot disclose information if they don't want to advertise. So this is very important. Now again we go back again that buyer consent is required. It's very, very important for selling broker. So when you are dealing with property with a consumer and they trust you that you are giving a private information. When they come to you, when you're putting an offer, you do the ID. We get their driving license. We have all private information, date of birth, all this information. So they are afraid, they are concerned that you will be misusing their information. And that is why one of this concern is the real estate council have put guidelines to make sure that even the address, because when you put an address or a picture or photo of the house, and unless you have a consent, you are disclosing that. This is why anytime I advertise, I have a written consent from my clients, buyer and seller, to make sure this is agreeable by both parties. So this is very, very important for you to think about that before you are advertising. Also, as a part of advertising part of it, when we are advertising in a public domain, the Real Estate Council has a very specific guidelines for real estate professional. So first of all, when you are advertising a property, I see many mistakes on social media. When you advertise on the social media, or you're telling that I sold this property, or you are saying, I'm a good real estate professional, come to me, and you claim so many things, those are part and parcel with your ethical, moral responsibility to say something which is right, and there could be a consumer complaint. So when you are advertising on the property, anything about real estate, you're soliciting, make sure your registered name, which is your real name, is completed. So I give you an example. I'm a Tahir Qureshi. That's my registered name. My designation is broker of record. That's required by law. Then I work with City Pro Realty Inc. That is my company that hired me. And brokerage word, that is under the law, the City Pro is listed as a brokerage. Under Real Estate Business Broker Act 2002 and as amended by Trust and Real Estate Services Act, TRESA, 2019, you have to have a license in order to practice in real estate. So you must say, my name is Tahir Qureshi, I'm a broker of record, I'm an employee of City Pro Realty Inc. and my firm is brokerage. That forename has to be there. Whether you use your personal phone number or business phone number, that is beside the point. This is very, very important. Number two, also go to rico.onc.ca and download your certificate. You're supposed to carry your license. It shows you license number, your name of the brokerage, and when you meet consumers, show them your license. It is an application, you can download it, it is on my phone, and you can download it. So when you meet a client, consumer, show them your license. That your license is a valid license. Under REBA, it's required that it must be in your possession when you are performing duties under the Act. It's very, very important that you do that, because consumer, they are depending on you. They are relying on you. They expect you to be ethical, professional, you maintain integrity, and help them. Majority of all of us, we do it, our effort. Our goal is to educate consumer so they can trust and have a confidence working with real estate professional. So it's very, very important that we follow the guidelines and help people. Now, go back to again, if consumer has an issue with advertisement, they see a property like we saw a call here, then you can pick up the phone or you can go to reco.on.ca and consumer can go directly. If you see a fellow realtor who is a licensed as a salesperson, broker, or a broker record is making mistake, please send them a text, send them an inbox message. Make sure that they're not making mistakes, because few people who will not comply with the bylaw will cause problem for good people. Majority of us are very good, hardworking. We work day and night for the best value we deliver to our client. So it's very, very important that consumers are able to continue to trust us. Our organized real estate, our boards, they spend thousands of dollars to advertise, to create our image. And we are professional, we work very hard, but very few people, they do wrong things. So we have to be very, very careful about advertisement. So this is my suggestion to you. When you are thinking about selling, advertising a sold property, make sure you have taken informed consent from the buyer and the seller. If you have any questions regarding this, you can go to RICO. Every realtor who is licensed, we are registrant. We have a license to practice in real estate, and we do continuing education. So everybody has a direct web access to my web on realestateCouncil.Ontario. Download this advertising guidelines on sold property from Real Estate Council of Ontario. You will never make this mistake again. And also, you keep your client happy. If your client does not want to give permission to seller to advertise, you make sure you convey that to the listing agent or broker or brokerage that my client doesn't want, and I don't want this denial of the opportunity for my client not to give offer. So this is sometimes happens that the realtor, because all brokerage are represented by human people, and people are the one make mistakes. Brokerage necessarily not making any mistake, is the people who make mistakes. So it's very, very important that you are communicating with the listing broker that my client does not want to give advertising consent, but we will consider it after the deal is done if we are able to be successful. Viewers, you are watching Realty Coffee Talk on Awaz Entertainment in Canada and around the world. I encourage those involved in real estate industry, whether you're a builder, you're a developer, you are a mortgage broker, or you are a renovator or a home buyer, you advertise in realty, on Awaz Entertainment, because we have almost $3.7 million total advertising capacity and viewers a month. So you will have a lot of potential to meet and do a good business. So I encourage you to contact our office and advertise. We have a special rate for you at Realty Coffee Talk. If you mention that you are a follower of Realty Coffee Talk, they will give you a special price. And their advertisement is 10 times a day, I believe is 30 seconds. They advertise 10 times a day on IPTV, Awaz Entertainment 580 on Gold IPTV. They also advertise on Facebook Live and YouTube Live. So you have a tremendous exposure by helping your business and connecting with realtors, builders, mortgage brokers, consumers, all, because they're watching it. Our program is being watched by 75,000 people every week. So we look forward to the opportunity to serve you. So you have the phone number on the side. I'm going to read your number. It's 647-484-0018. You can call this number or the number on the advertisement and book a place. Thank you, viewer. My name is Tahir Qureshi. I'm a host of Realty Coffee Talk. I hope today you have an idea about giving consent and not to give consent for advertising property when the property is sold. You have this choice. You cannot be denied the opportunity to purchase a property because the listing brokerage forced that clause on you. So make sure when you do give permission, you give a consent, informed consent to the buyer. My name is Tahir Qureshi. On behalf of Awaz Entertainment, our crew, we thank you very much for watching. We look forward for opportunity to see you next Thursday. We're going to have a multiple representation topic because there's a lot of bidding happening right now. So how to deal with the multiple bidding offers. So that will be our next topic on next Thursday at 7 p.m. Thank you. Goodbye. God bless you. God bless Canada.